So I'm going to talk to you about some ideas of improving leadership through neuroscience research and taking what we're learning about how the brain actually learns, how it collaborates, how it performs, and applying that in businesses to get greater performance. I just completed a year of study with Middlesex University in Manchester, England. It was a distance learning program leading to a certificate in the foundations of neuroleadership. And so I've had the privilege and the excitement of hearing from the people on the forefront of the research, but also people on the forefront of the application of the research. So I do have to throw out the usual caveats. Neuroleadership is an emerging field. This is really exciting because we are at the beginning of what I think is going to be quite a revolution in the way we teach business leaders how to relate to organizations. But it's a nascent movement at this point. They aren't teaching it yet in your university, but I predict that within 10 years, every major business school will incorporate this in their curriculum. So I think it's going to change a lot. Neuroscience as a research area has a pretty long history. People were experimenting with trying to figure out how the brain works. But the real application of scientific experimentation proving what is actually going on really dates back to the early 90s with the invention of the functional MRI. So we could do an experiment finding out how you and others react to certain situations and see what happens in your brain and map that against models developed from animal research and models from research labs all over the world. So it's only really a relatively short time that we could see it in action. You know, they could dissect a brain, or they could do brain surgery and probe to find out, you know, where you knew how to lift your arm or the leg, but they couldn't actually see what happened chemically and electrically until pretty recently. Some research findings are sometimes contradictory, and that can be troubling, but in every case that I have seen where two research labs got contradictory results, the population they were researching was quite different. And so some of the reactions were different. I also need to say every brain is actually different. We're going to go over just briefly some of the brain real estate and what it's typically allocated to doing, but this does vary a little bit by some, you know, distance. It's generally true for most populations, but if you suffered a catastrophic loss of some brain tissue early in your life, your brain will typically wire around it. So you might be performing visual activities in an area of the brain that normally does not. So there are exceptions. The important thing about that is to know that your brain is plastic. It changes day to day. It changes over your lifetime. And even now, recent research is showing that it is not true that you only lose neurons and don't gain them after you become an adult. There are certain areas of the brain that do generate new neurons. Not the whole brain, but certain areas right up to the time that you pass away. And this is exciting. It means for those of us who are getting a little older, there's still hope. So we'll go on with this. So what is neuroleadership? You probably haven't heard that term. Well, the term was really concocted by Dr. David Rock, and he is the head of the Neuroleadership Institute. They do have a newsletter you can subscribe to. They have an international conference every year. This year it is in New York City in October. And it was a compendium of all of the researchers and how they thought this could be applied in business. So it's really a field of study that explores the linkage between leadership, human performance in organizations, and the emerging insights. The idea behind this is to help organizations and individuals maximize their performance personally and collectively, and hopefully helping leaders understand optimal brain performance, because optimal brain performance is what you primarily want from all of your knowledge workers. So we're going to quickly go over a little bit about how the brain functions. I am going to show you some charts of brains, and just to get you an idea of where some of the areas are, because we will talk about them. I'm going to talk about some neuro-leadership facts, and keep in mind facts can be disputed later, but generally accepted facts that are relevant to you as a leader or a follower or a member of organization. We're going to talk about what is necessary in order to get optimal brain function. What is the default network in your brain, and why is that important to leadership? And then finally, David Rock's SCARF model, because it's easy to remember, and it applies all of the lessons that we have gotten from neuroscience experiments into an application you can use in the way you manage. So the amazing brain, I've borrowed these slides with permission from the Neuro Leadership Institute. You know, the brain is amazing. It really is. It is who you are. There's a great book, I'm actually carrying it around, called Your Synaptic Self. You know, your synapses are who you are. It is fascinating. It's only 3 pounds. It's, you know, 2 to 3% of your body weight, but your body allocates 20% of the blood supply to it, which is quite a lot. We think of it as the intersection of the mind and the body. And it is an intersection of the mind and the body, and they are. It is very difficult to split these things apart. There's an interesting book, The Brain in Your Gut. We now know that there are more neurotransmitters in your gut than there are in your head. And that the vagus nerve, which runs between your brain and your gut, used to be thought of as one way, send a signal down. It's not. Information is coming back. So your whole body is a brain function. And this is a pretty new concept. So in every culture there are expressions like, I had a gut feeling. That's actually a very real thing. You know, your gut sometimes tells you how to react to danger or other things. And the neurotransmitters there are part of the communication networks. Our nervous system is this, you know, miles and miles and miles and miles of interconnection between every cell in your body and your brain. And this is how you function. It's very important to understand that this is all mapped to every part of you. So your forebrain, your midbrain, your hindbrain, it's all controlling different parts of your body and parts of your reactions, but it's all integrated together. So you've heard of the cerebral cortex. When we talk about smart people, we say, oh, he was very cerebral, borrowing from neuroscience. But the cerebral cortex is what really distinguishes humans from the rest of the animal species. The reptiles do not have much cerebral cortex. They have found a few cells, even in reptiles, but there's not much of a cerebral cortex. In humans, it's highly developed, In monkeys and apes, there's a presence of it, and in some other animals. Recent studies have shown things like pair bonding and taking care of your offspring collaboratively actually requires some cerebral cortex. So a lot of the behavior that we distinguish as human, or at least allocated to mammals, is dependent on this. Reptiles have no ability to form those relationships. And it's not really important to know, but it is important to understand that all of that convoluted folding of the brain allows you to have way more neural real estate inside that container called your skull. And that's also quite important. The frontal lobe is really important, and for most of you here, you have pretty good frontal lobes. We know this because you're in college and you're studying. Without that frontal lobe, you probably have trouble with it. It has a major role in the planning and execution of movements, but it also contains the very critical prefrontal cortex. It's called the premotor areas, and as we go from the front to the back of the skull, I'll just say this for those of you who play sports that you might be advised to wear a helmet. Getting whacked really hard here can be devastating. So take care of your brain. The prefrontal cortex is associated with your higher level thought, your decision making, planning, learning, discerning between friends and non-friends, figuring out which way the stop sign is pointed or which road it is on at an intersection. And we're going to talk more about that, because when we are working on problems, whether we're writing computer programs, we're doing finance calculations, whatever, we're relying largely on that prefrontal cortex. I'm going to mention some other places because they're very important. The parietal lobe and the central sulcus are very important. We forget that our sense of touch, pressure, heat is very critical to how we are processing and learning. And people who have deficits in this area are oftentimes severely handicapped. The temporal lobe, they talk about it being inferior, meaning being under. It doesn't mean it's less important. Auditory processing and memory. So damage in this area will not only affect your hearing, it will affect your ability to remember, not just what you heard, but just remember in general. So these areas can be very multi-purpose. The occipital lobe, we've already talked about that. Your eyes, your processing there. And the insula, hidden. This is kind of interesting. The insula, the center of our emotions, lies underneath all of this real estate. In a way, protected. And the whole idea of emotionally processing things, we think of, oh, well, they were just too emotional, is a common thing. Making sense of the world requires emotions. Some of you psychology people know about Phineas Gage, who was a very high-functioning business person who suffered a head injury, and what got damaged was his emotional center. His logic, his reasoning was still intact. He couldn't make one good decision. He couldn't relate to other people. Without the emotion, he was non-functional, and he had been a very functional human being. So before you dismiss emotions, they are incredibly important. And this area of emotion also processes smell and taste, which is kind of interesting. So the emotional feeling of disgust that you might have when somebody does something really obnoxious. Utilizes the exact same brain real estate that if somebody had you smell something repugnant or you saw something repugnant, the same part of the brain lights up. So we reuse this real estate. And you know, this probably, the insula is found in all creatures. You know, they do have some level of emotion, but the issue of disgust is life-preserving. You know, you don't want to eat rotten food. You don't want to get yourself in trouble in that way. So this is an important part of the brain. You've probably heard of the basal ganglia. This is where you form habit. This is where skill and habit building. And it's also an area where we circulate the rewarding chemicals. Very important. This is where your dopamine helps you form habits. So anything rewarding is likely to be repeated. And we're going to talk about that in leadership. The brain actually wires because of the stimulation of rewarding neurochemicals. So the more connections are made, the more connections, the denser the networks, the more likely the behavior will be repeated. So rewards, very important for your brain and for your habits. The limbic system, this is all part of the emotional center. It helps us detect pleasure, pain. It is also related to memory, so that we remember painful, difficult things, and we remember pleasurable things. And most people, unless their brain has been miswired, are going to approach pleasure and avoid pain. Remember things like hippocampus, this is where your memory is. The amygdala, this is fight, flight, or freeze. The hypothalamus is where you alert to things. These are important to understand as we go forward with this. So we're going to talk about the amygdala. Probably more important to understand something about the amygdala than any other part of this. So it's part of the limbic system. It's essential for decoding all emotions, all, happiness and otherwise. But it is particularly acutely oriented towards fear. Fear. Also, anger. Now, the amygdala is very tightly connected to the hippocampus and memory to help modulate our reactions to fear. But here's what neuroscience has discovered. There's 5 times as much neural real estate devoted to processing fear as there is devoted to processing reward. Which means just about the easiest thing you as a leader can do is frighten people. And you might say, well, that's a good thing, because if they're scared of me, they're going to do what I tell them. I worked in the auto industry. That was probably their motto. But let me tell you what happens, and we'll talk about this some more. I think we have this, no, back up. Every time the amygdala lights up, the prefrontal cortex stops functioning. Every time. Now think about this evolutionarily. I should first tell you the amygdala is the fastest processor in the brain. It operates many, many, many times faster than the cortex does. The cortex is the last part of the brain to have evolved, and it is a relatively slow processing unit. So, back when we were evolving, and there were very real biological threats, things that wanted to eat us, or earthquakes, landslides, whatever, you didn't want a brain that said, have I seen that saber-toothed tiger before? Does he normally eat people? Does he look hungry? You don't want a brain that does that. You want a brain that says, run, now, go. That's what you want. Or freeze, don't move. As a result, the rational, reasoning, logical part of the brain shuts off whenever the amygdala is lit up. So, what do we want in business? People who are ready to run or freeze or fight, or people who are ready to think through, reason through, find solutions. So, lighting up the amygdala in other people, whether it's your children, your friends, the person who's trying to help you at the store, or your employees, is a totally counterproductive thing. How many of you get into some disagreement and you just can't find the words? And later you're going, darn it, why can't I ever think of what I want to say in the middle of an argument? Anybody have that experience? Yes, you have a strong freeze reaction. You can't find the words because your prefrontal cortex is off. I won't ask any of you to self-identify, but there are some of you when your amygdala lights up want to hit somebody. That's the fight. And there are some of you who's like, I'm so out of here. I'm gone. So we each have a little different orientation, but it's the same thing. Direct, threatening stress is going to light up the amygdala. And let me tell you, this stress that can light up the amygdala can be the most amazing things. I've seen some research on social exclusion. Think of all the things in business where we exclude people. Much better to say, I don't see a real need for you to be at the meeting, but if you'd like to come, please come. And people will elect to stay out, and they won't. But if you say, we don't need you at the meeting, we'll tell you about what went on later. The person is going to experience stress. Their thinking is probably going to suffer. They're probably going to ruminate on it. And you know, ruminating, thinking about stressful things, to your brain is the same as if you were experiencing them. The brain doesn't know the difference between a trauma that happened yesterday and one you're ruminating on today, which is why people with anxiety disorders are so handicapped by them. Why post-traumatic stress victims are nearly non-functional. It just doesn't matter. The car backfiring sounds like that bomb that went off, and they relive it. The brain just has the same experience over again. So, it's called amygdala hijack, because when the amygdala lights up, it hijacks everything else. And that's something that is just innate to us. It preserved our life. But then you move into highly organized environments where you can be excluded, you can be argued with, you can, have all of these experiences, and your amygdala is going to light up, and your judgment is going to be impaired for some period of time. So this is, if you don't remember anything else, just be very careful about making people afraid. All those managers who like to operate on fear, uncertainty, and doubt, we need to replace them with better organizational psychologists. So let's talk about the basic organization of the brain. It's neurons, and you knew that. They receive, process, and transfer information. They conduct electrical activity. You are a chemical electrical factory from end to end. It can be measured, and this is how we're learning a lot about the brain. Your neurons release neurotransmitters across the gaps, and those neurotransmitters are how the information moves. Typically, mature neurons do not regenerate in the central nervous system. Typically. And they're finding that with right stimulation, other areas of the central nervous system can regenerate. Glial cells are important. They outnumber neurons. They provide structural support. They insulate. You know, if you have frayed insulation on any electrically active circuit, you know, that's not good. The messages don't get where they're going. They're produced throughout life, and any disease or outside thing that interferes with them will destroy neurons. So you've seen pictures of neurons. You know, they have, you know, they all have the same structure. Some are big, some are long. But the important thing is that messages go from one end to the other in neurons. There's over 1 billion in your brain, in the adult brain. Each neuron has up to 10,000 connections to other neurons. Neurons actually link together in circuits. Circuits link together to create systems. And certain circuitry in your body is used for more than one thing. Some of you may know that babies who don't crawl later have trouble reading. You go, why is that? The circuits that are developed during the crawling stage happen to be the circuits that you used to read with. And so babies that don't crawl often have reading handicaps. People talk about graded potential. This is important for understanding mirror neurons. Certain neurons can be firing at a very low level for a certain behavior, and you might not even be aware of it. For example, they discovered mirror neurons in 1995 in monkeys in a research lab in Italy. When the researcher would drink his coffee, this monkey, who was the subject of experiments and was constantly in a state where his brain was exposed and they had a lot of probes, when the researcher would lift his arm to drink out of a cup, at a low level, the neural circuits in the monkey's brain that would fire if the monkey were lifting a cup and drinking would fire. So they would fire, it's called an action potential. It's like, get ready, I might be about to pick up a cup and drink from it. The first mirror neurons that were discovered were the mirror neurons for mirroring physical activities. So they were discovered first. They were discovered in monkeys. They've since been verified in people. So we have a system hardwired into our very being whose job it was to help us learn how to do what other people do. Makes great sense. And as we learn that skill, it gets refined, the real estate devoted to it gets denser, we get better. You know, we crawl, we stand, we fall down, we stand, we learn to stand on our own, we learn to walk. It's that circuitry which is building, it's there, but it's also building greater connection. But when I see you drink out of a cup, or get out of your chair, or look at your BlackBerry, in my brain, I'm doing the same thing you're doing at a low level. It's only when you have this really large electrical signal, you move your arm, you drink out of the cup. So dopamine pathways, serotonin pathways, they circulate throughout the brain. They get to all areas of the brain, but they're very important for controlling what's going on with you. Again, dopamine pathways, reward, pleasure, euphoria, motion requires dopamine. All your motor functions, compulsion, people who are compulsive have dopamine circulating a lot for behavior like washing their hands or something. Perseveration, your ability to stay up late at night and study calculus when you hate calculus is dependent on having a good dopamine pathway. This is also important when you're managing people. Some people have some issues with this. And then, of course, the others that have to do the serotonin pathways, mood, memory, processing, sleep, and cognition. So this is all really important stuff. So given all of that, we're going to talk about some facts that are universally accepted until something better comes along, but I think they form a good foundation. The brain is always seeking to avoid threat and to seek reward. Well, that's not exactly a newsflash, and we know that in people's behavior, but it's really the brain. We tend to think of this as personality. We need to start thinking of it as biology. Because when we think of it as personality, we think you have a choice. That you could choose to stay in a hot, uncomfortable room and do this mundane, boring task and do it with precision if only you wanted to. And that's just factually not true. It's biological. It's not personality. Now, there are differences in how we're wired, and we can actually change our wiring a bit, but it's wiring. It's wiring. Birds fly and fish swim, and you are programmed to seek reward and to avoid threat. Again, I'm going to say this again, 5 times as much real estate devoted to that threat thing. So as a manager, you need to think about how you approach people. I learned, I've had as many as 1,200 employees, and you know, I was like the old woman in the shoe. I didn't know who they all were. Honestly, I didn't. I mean, you try to, you have all hands meetings and whatever, but they also know that we are wired for about 150 relationships. That's something else that we know. Not 1,200 with people that you barely see. So I learned pretty early that if I had a headache or I was late to the executive staff meeting and I dashed out of my car in the executive garage and I was running across the campus to get to the meeting and I didn't acknowledge you, within a couple days there would be rumors that I was leaving or there was going to be a reorg of the organization. It's so easy to threaten people. So I just made it a habit. I didn't care if they were my employees or not. I said hi to everybody. And no matter how bad my day was going, when I was out in the public area, I just had to say hi to everybody in order to keep everybody, you know, and they maybe didn't know that I didn't know their name, but they got acknowledged. That was good enough, and it reduced their threat level. Arousal is required for focus. It is focus. It's required for learning, and it is about dopamine. It is about dopamine. Isn't it much easier to learn something that you're having fun at? You know? The first time you played ping pong with your friends, you could stay for hours. It was just fun. It was very rewarding. Every time you heard that ball go, you got a reward. Arousal, focus, and this is something we can think about when we create environments. And more than anything, neurons that fire together wire together. Electrically, if one neuron is secreting chemicals and another picks it up, they build more dendrite connections. And the more time you execute that action, the stronger, the denser, and the more likely it is you're going to be able to perform this. This is very important when you're learning something that's physically difficult. I recently got back to piano. And believe me, I have no real talent for this, but it doesn't matter. You know, for months, I have no idea who owns this hand. It won't do anything I want it to do. But you know, after doing it and doing it and doing it, one day I can play a chord with my left hand and even get it at the right time. That's because with enough stimulation and enough reward, my brain is, even at this old age, wiring so that I can repeat that behavior. This, I think, is the most optimistic thing I've ever learned, actually. I mean, unless you have some significant deficits. You know, I'm never going to be a concert pianist, but I believe one day I'll be able to play competently. And I think this is something that we should understand about people and organizations. Practice, practice, practice. We'll get those neurons wired together and will help with the behavior. And then here's one that we violate in business. We do it to ourselves, we do it to other people by keeping them too long. Sleep. Sleep is required for long-term memory storage. Your brain consolidates what you learned at night when you're sleeping. They're absolutely conclusive proof. And we just need to not make heroes out of people who stay up all night working on that programming problem, because it's not healthy. So we're going to talk about not healthy. Chronic sustained stress destroys neurons. You don't want to lose neurons. It destroys neurons and other brain tissue, but especially in the hippocampus. My generation, you know, the boomers, we're getting a little bit older. You read all these gloomy articles that we're going to suffer from Alzheimer's at a horrible rate. The evidence is mounting that dementia is going to be the problem. They aren't going to be able to build enough nursing homes to house all of us who are literally going to lose our mind. And I don't know if that's true. I'm hoping it's not. But some of it may be the chronic sustained stress that we live with. It is absolutely proven that that will destroy your memory. It will destroy parts of your brain, and it will prone you to things like dementia as you age. So you guys are all young enough to start managing your stress levels now. Again, I'll say it repeatedly. You know, they say what you're going to say it, and then say it again. The amygdala lights up, prefrontal cortex goes away. It impairs your judgment, totally impairs your social skills. And if you constantly live in an environment of threat, and remember, threat can be the avatars aren't throwing the ball to you. I'm not talking about lions and tigers and bears. Lions and tigers and bears come and go. You know, you run from the lion, the tiger, and the bear, but then your body returns to normal. That's how we were biologically built. It's the abrasive boss, the disagreeable co-worker. It's the working on a project you actually hate. It's going without sleep. It's watching. Remember, your brain doesn't know the difference between something that's happening and something you see. Watching stressful things on TV, whether it be the news or violent movies. It's all stress to your brain, and it's all damaging. So be very careful where you put your attention. When you put your attention on something, ask yourself, do I want to be what I'm focused on? Because that's what I'm going to become. So if you focus on negative things, guess what? You're going to get a lot more negative. And this may be that we think of it as personality, but personality is a manifestation of what's going on inside of you. It's biology too. Any intense focus depletes neurotransmitters. So, how many hours should you sit banging your head against the wall on some complex problem? Well, it isn't hours you should, because you're going to deplete your neurotransmitters. You need to be focused. We're going to talk about focus and creativity in a minute, but you need to take a break. Neurotransmitters can be regenerated relatively quickly, but for your own health, for your own performance, get up every hour. If for only 5 5 minutes. Put the problem out of your mind, move around, get some oxygen going, look out the window. Don't call your angry teenage child. That's not a break. That doesn't reduce stress. Really, take your brain out of that place where you were intensely focused, and every couple hours, no more than 4, give yourself some small amount of nourishment. Not a Snickers bar. Sugar doesn't help. It boosts you up, it crashes you down, it affects your hormone levels. We all know this. We know this for lots of reasons, but I'm talking about your brain here. Your brain operates on glucose. Stabilizing glucose is very important. Flooding yourself with sugar doesn't stabilize glucose. It brings it up, crashes it down. If you got to get something out of the machine, and it looks like candy, make it something like M&M's peanuts, because at least it has protein, which will help to stabilize the blood sugar. But it'd be better to be something else. And the results show human performance improves. You can keep that blood sugar level. Thinking improves, and it's largely the effect on neurotransmitters. So remember, intense focus is going to deplete your neurotransmitters. Your brain stops functioning optimally. The best thing you can do, get up and move around, get some oxygen, get some water. The brain is very affected by dehydration. All of these things make a big difference in performance. And they have people do performance tests that are a little stressed, a lot stressed this way. None of us perform well unless the optimal environment there. Even moderate sleep deprivation acutely hampers creativity, problem solving, and emotional regulation. And you know, we probably knew this at some level. When you're a little bit sleep deprived, and your friend or your spouse or your kids meet you in the driveway when you come in from work, and you know, you tend to snap at them. All other things being equal, we don't have great emotional regulation. And for people who want to get ahead in life, emotional regulation is highly correlated with success. So sleep is important for memory, it's important for problem solving, and creativity in sleep-deprived groups, just forget it. Here's the one that is going to be hard for everybody to actually put into practice. Every single study shows if you're doing 2 things at once, you're doing 2 things badly. Multitasking impairs memory, impairs performance, severely depletes neurotransmitters. Severely. And I think it's one of the reasons why everybody is so wired up all the time. They're operating without the smooth flow of neurotransmitters and the smooth flow of focus from one important thing to another important thing. Yeah, I'm listening to you while you're texting. No, I defy anybody to be really good at it. And here's one that we're going to talk about when we get to a model for managing. Your brain is bound by a skull. It doesn't get any bigger than that. It does get denser. It does get more capable at some things. But nature doesn't devote a lot of effort to non-essentials. So it's very important that we have learned that there are multiple and redundant social networks in your brain. They are there when you were born, and their purpose is social connection. Dr. Dan Siegel has done at UCLA has done a ton of research on this, on the social brain. He says the research that we've come across tells us we are exquisitely social. And I will tell you, most businesses do not operate as though the people in them needed social connection. One of the most fascinating things to me is creativity that, aha, moment, I see it now, happens after a period of focus, but when you are in a low stress, relaxed state of mind. So if I come up to you guys and I say, okay, listen, we've got to get together and solve this problem. Now, today we're going to brainstorm all the creative things that we might do, and we're not leaving this conference room until we have a solution. Business behaves like that all the time. And I can tell you what happens. I've witnessed it most of my career, but I now know why. What will happen is you will itemize all of the most obvious, mostly not very useful, but we will go through this exercise of writing everything down, we'll narrow the list, and we'll go try something we've tried before, and we aren't probably going to get a breakthrough. That is not how innovation happens. It's not how creativity happens. And you all know this. You know that when you've been working on something, whether you're building a deck in your backyard or you're working on a problem at work, it's when you're shampooing your hair in the shower, you suddenly see how you're going to work your way around that problem. Or you're coming down a ski slope and you make a turn, and all of a sudden what pops in your head is some brilliant idea that you're going to apply at work. Something you've been working on. And out of the blue it shows up. They can see it happen in your brain. Electrically, these very disparate areas of your brain suddenly light up and synchronize their activities. And it's very difficult often to say where your idea came from. Often it's very visual. But they can see it happen. And there are certain problems that you can only solve with insight. And they'll give these problems to people, and they'll have them all wired up and whatever. And as long as it's try to solve the problem, they never, ever get the insight. But it's when they play relaxing music and they say, we'll come back to that problem tomorrow. Let's do something else. That suddenly people see the solution. If you surround yourself with positive people and you cultivate positive affect, it will also have a profound effect on your life, your capability, your performance on the job. We've always liked to hang out with the fun people. I mean, the rainy day people don't usually attract anybody but the rainy day people. But the problem is we all encounter rainy day people. And they also know with those social networks, we attune to other people. If we work together, our desks are next to each other, our biology will attune to each other. And we're all faced with no people, no situations, no companies. And if you're going to survive it and do your best, the best techniques that we have for you gaining control and being able to hold that no energy away from you, mindfulness. I'll recommend Dr. Dan Siegel's book, Mind Sight. Pretty easy read, but lots of research on this. So, positive affect. Again, we've always known people are social. Brain research, exquisitely social. We are by nature social. Also from much of the research, and I've alluded to this, if you really, he called it the healthy brain platter, but if you really want to manage your performance, your success, you're going to manage the healthy brain platter. You are going to make sure you get adequate sleep, and it's probably more than you think. You are going to be physical. Anything physical you do that is good for your body is great for your brain. Focus time. We need to focus. You need to train your brain for periods of focus, but this isn't 8 hours. I had the pleasure of going to the Human Performance Institute in Orlando, Florida, which is just amazing, and Jim Lear, I see somebody who knows who it is. Jim Lear was actually the teacher for my 2.5 days. Amazing man. They train high-performance athletes, surgical teams, all sorts of people. He knows a lot about human performance. And he talks about, you know, when a really great golf player plays, you know, he's really focused on that swing. Now when he's walking between holes, not so much. We tend to ask the executives to be on their game 12 hours a day. Nobody can do that. You have to interrupt focus time with that rest time. The Human Performance Institute has proved it, and the brain research work all over the globe has proved it. This is what you need. You want to get ahead in life, you want to be successful, you want to have a great family, you want to have great friends. You need to put these in your priority list. Time in, that's the meditation, the mindfulness. Time in, very important. Downtime. You want to have an aha moment? Go sit on the beach and watch the waves roll in. Don't think about anything. Take the dog for a walk. Playtime. That's positive affect time. And connecting time. We really do have to connect. And I talked to a couple classes earlier, and there might be some people here, but when we think about quality connecting time, the best way to really get this is think about the small child runs in the door, has the picture they painted, or the, you know, the spelling test they got an A on, or whatever. How well does it work? Oh, okay, now listen, I have 3 minutes for this. Give me the sound bites here. No, you get down, you say, wow, those are really amazing colors. How did you choose those? What were you thinking when you drew this? Or how did it feel to get that A? That's connecting time. That's being present. We are exquisitely social. We attune others. We attune our children. We attune our spouse. We attune our friends. They attune us. This quality connecting time. Yes, it's a social thing. Yes, it is a nice thing. It is important for your brain. And your brain is important for virtually everything you do. The default network. What's the default network? Well, the default network is busy whenever you aren't. I mean, when you aren't focused, when you aren't playing golf, in those moments in between tasks, the default network lights up. It's the default. It's what your brain does when it's not being asked to do anything else. So you might go, well, how important is that? The default network is mostly the social network. So when you are not task-oriented, your brain says, I better attend to something really important. It's like the social context, which is why when you're daydreaming, you tend to think about people and relationships, think about yourself. It's self-referencing, it's interpersonally referencing, and anytime you do not direct your brain to do something else, it goes back to working on the social networks. It links all the social brain centers, and there are multiple ones. It's why we believe that we are so exquisitely social. because it keeps reinforcing itself. It circulates dopamine when you have a good memory of something. So all of this stuff has been consolidated by Dr. David Rock into a model that we can bring into business without giving a lecture on the brain. I really appreciate that you've indulged me to get to this point, but this is how you can boil it down and you can apply it in business. SCARF stands for status, certainty, autonomy, relatedness, and fairness. All of the research shows that these are needs of the brain. So let's talk about status because it's most easily understood. It is not the big title, it's not the corner office, it's not any of those things that we typically would associate with status. It is maybe better called standing. So in the organization or in the group or on the team, you are respected and valued. You have standing with the other people. That's status. When you have, and this is very much a social thing, of course, but when you feel that you belong, you contribute, that people listen to you, that people value your input, you perform better. Is that news? Really? Just think about an environment where they really aren't glad that you're there. They think everything, you know, every time you speak, somebody rolls their eyes. Are you going to do your best job? No. Creating an environment as a leader where the members of your team, the members of your organization have standing, have status, have respect, have a place, a valued place, critical to performance. And one might ask, why would you have employees that you didn't feel that way about? There's either something wrong with you or them. This is very important. Certainty. The last 15 or 20 years of my career, most of what was going on in the jobs that I was in, and I've worked in multiple industries, was pretty uncertain. How many times have you heard, we live in uncertain times? Or some similar thing. It's all whitewater. You know, for a long time it was, you know, we need a burning platform. You know, all this kind of, you know, buzz stuff that people talk about. It's very uncertain. It lacks stability, predictability, but the brain wants to know. The brain is a prediction machine. It's always predicting what will happen next. We've seen that time and time again. It wants to know that what it's predicting moment to moment is pretty on. And when the predictions the brain is making are disrupted, if I were to do something totally unexpected, totally outrageous, whether it was funny or stupid or insulting, it doesn't matter. You would get an amygdala hijack because your brain said, error detection, I didn't expect that. Now, it could turn into a good thing, but the initial reaction is an amygdala hijack. The brain is predicting what's going to happen next. And so your employees, the people around you, want some level of certainty. Well, the truth is a lot of things are uncertain. But as leaders, instead of emphasizing all the uncertainties, which is what we seem to have this catastrophizing gene, we got to catastrophize about everything. Instead of doing that, we can emphasize what is certain. We can help people see clearly what can be seen clearly and create a greater degree and feeling of certainty, and even small changes in that improve performance on complex problem solving. Autonomy, this is one almost everybody relates to. I have yet to meet the person who said, well, what I want in a boss is a nitpicking micromanager. I have yet to meet that person. Anybody here really want a nitpicking, type A micromanager who wants to tell you how and when to breathe? No? You're not too dissimilar from everybody else I've ever known. Autonomy, particularly with people who are competent to do their job. You know, when you're training people, you do, it's different. But most teams, people are there because they have skills. They have contributions to make. So tell them what needs to be done. Don't stand there and tell them how to do it. That, I mean, if you are a process industry with rigorous process, it's fine that you have process charts and you have methods. That's fine. But to have another human being hovering over you is just horrible for the brain. Horrible, horrible. You can tell why. You're going to get an amygdala hijack. You're not going to remember. You're going to make mistakes. If you ever had somebody standing over your head doing that, you can't even spell your name. And this is biological. Relatedness, I've talked a lot about the social networks. We really need to bond with the people we work with because that helps attune us, it helps attune them. The obvious happens. If I care about you, I care about your success. If you're having trouble, I offer my assistance. I don't let you struggle with things. And that's good for organization. But biologically, belonging, really belonging and relating to people. Positive affect, sense of security, all the things you need. And then fairness. I think this is the toughest as a leader. You know, I always thought I was fair, but I wish I had a dime for every time somebody said, well, why did they get the promotion? Why are they compensated better than I am? Why do they always get the really good projects? Why do I get the tough problems? I mean, if you're a leader, you get all this. Striving towards fairness is really important. There have been tons of experiments on game playing, and again, people are all wired up. The smallest inequities just send the brain into a state where it doesn't perform well. So, fairness issues, tough ones to deal with, but I think this is where leaders need to think about that. You know, we have a tendency to say we're not letting anybody know what anybody else makes. So there's rumors and whatever. Some companies are very transparent about this, and they tend to have less of that organizational stress. I don't know what the magic bullet is, but as a leader, think about SCARF and think about fairness. So implications. The productivity of your team, the productivity of you, the productivity and the financial results of your company are directly dependent on optimal brain function. Now, 32 years in business, 5 industries, here's the most important thing I learned, and you're going to go, duh, I hope it didn't take you 32 years. But here it is. Every good thing, every bad thing that happens in your organization is the action or inaction of a person. So what's your highest leverage point? It's optimizing people so that they do more good things, fewer bad things. Leaders will be most effective if they achieve work-life balance. There's a researcher in the Northeast who has been doing research on CEOs. And when she publishes her results, it's going to be uncomfortable because the tendency to a lack of work-life balance shows up in bad decision-making. It shows up in a lot of errors. Your workers will perform the best if they have work-life balance. So as a leader, you need to create environments where this is possible. When I worked in Silicon Valley, a lot of young people, very expensive place. They lived in, a bunch of them in an apartment. They were happy to stay at work, particularly because we had all those goodies and we had futons and we had ping pong tables or whatever. I had to send them home. 16 hours at work is not good for you. And you could see performance deteriorate. I didn't know why, but I just, people are tired is what you tell yourself. It's actually your brain can't work like that. I think in the future, great leadership will be very mindful of the scarf needs of their team and their organization. I hope that in my lifetime, this will be part of every MBA program, every HR program, and the way that we really think about leadership will be changed by this. So these two researchers have been focusing directly on CEOs and C-level officers and have shown, and will be showing, a moderate amount of stress. You got to have enough arousal to pay attention. Really good sleep, positive affect leads to the best performance of executives, and it's not too different from what else we've been saying here.